Hello, and welcome to the Simple Steps for the Whole You podcast. We are up to episode number 63. That is hard to believe. Remember when we just celebrated episode 50?
Yeah,
Feels like we
not long
just
ago.
did. Yeah. So today on episode 63, we're talking about getting free of perfectionism or embracing our imperfection. So what is it? What is perfectionism? We'll talk about that. We'll talk about how it impacts us, how we can embrace our imperfections and even embrace the parts of us that long to be perfect. Just being self-compassionate toward our perfectionistic side. So why do we even carry a belief that we should be perfect or anything other than human? One of my daughters recently just said that so clearly, like, why do we even do that? Why do we ever expect that? It's just really ridiculous,
Yes.
to
Yeah.
be honest. Why would we ever think that? So here's the thought that we want to share. Some lines from a really great book called God Came Near by Max Lucado. We'll put the link in the show notes. God Came Near by Max Lucado. So listen to this and think about that idea of perfectionism, humanity, all of that. When God chose to reveal himself, he did so through a human body. The tongue that called forth the dead was a human one. The hand that touched the leper had dirt under its nails. The feet upon which the women wept were calloused and dusty. And his tears, oh, don't miss the tears. They came from a heart as broken as yours or mine ever has been. So people came to him. My, how they came to him. They came at night. They touched him as he walked down the street. They followed him around the sea. They invited him into their homes and placed their children at his feet. And why? Because he refused to be a statue in a cathedral or a priest in an elevated pulpit. He chose to be Jesus. There was not one person who was reluctant to approach him for fear of being rejected. We just say, well said, Max Lucado. We couldn't have said it better.
Right.
Jesus was human.
Yeah. So that little, piece from his book just shows us that Jesus in his human body, he was both human and God, and he was approachable, relatable, and people came to him. So why then do we carry a belief, we ask the question again, that we should be perfect or anything other than human? If Jesus, had all these qualities that were, kind of dirty, messy, and yet people were still drawn to him, why do we, have to have any other standard? So that's kind of what we're going to look at today. Let's start with some definitions, though. Brene Brown, as you know, does a lot of work around the shame and is a researcher around that, and she has some. So we're going to share some things from her work today, and one of them is her definition of perfectionism, which we thought was great. So her definition is perfectionism is a self-destructive and addictive belief system that fuels this primary thought: if I look perfect, live perfectly, work perfectly, and do everything perfectly, I can avoid or minimize the painful feelings of shame, judgment, and blame. So it's just trying to avoid that. So we're trying to avoid when we try to be perfect. Where perfectionism exists, shame is always lurking. Brene says shame is the birthplace of perfectionism. It is at its core, you're trying to earn approval and acceptance. So what are the symptoms of perfectionism, friends? Let's go through a few. So there's fear of failure, and we'll probably talk about this a lot more next week, so stay tuned. I'll just go right to the next one. Impossible expectations or standards for yourself. Difficulty getting started or finishing tasks. It's possible you won't start something because it can't be done perfectly. For example, this podcast, it never would have started if I was going to do it perfectly. Oh, you take over, Lisa. You read the rest.
So another symptom of perfectionism is just increased stress and anxiety, as you all probably can think about that. And when you're striving to be perfect, you're going to feel a lot of stress and anxiety, a lot of pressure. And so that word I just used, striving, maybe those of you that that perfectionism resonates with you, that word striving probably also really resonates with you. I know it does with me. Self-criticism, because you're never going to live up to your own perfect standard. So
Mm-hmm.
then there's so much opportunity to criticize yourself and your thoughts, and even out loud.
Yeah.
And then just impossible expectations of others. Often, when we really struggle with perfectionism, we have high standards for those around us.
Aren't
So what was that?
I'm just going to add something, like, if we are having, like, the expectations of others, aren't they sometimes just all in our head? And we
Mm,
imagine that they have a certain expectation of us. And so we try to live up to it, but they don't.
mm.
I mean,
I
sometimes.
guess what I was thinking about was the expectations we have of others.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But I think you're thinking, and they're both things,
Both,
like
and yeah.
people having expectations of us to be perfect, for sure. Yeah, that
Mm-hmm.
is also completely related. Yeah, that we think that they are thinking we should do something a certain way. But actually, I just said this to someone else today, that actually most people are thinking about themselves.
It's true.
Walk into a room and you're not really thinking about the other people in the room so much. You're thinking about you,
Yeah.
and what people are thinking about you. And yeah.
Yeah, that's so true.
Hmm. Yeah. So if all of that didn't sound enough like a problem or a challenge, we want to think about that a little bit more. Just the problem with this way of living, with having those perfectionistic standards, and then kind of pushing it down and not thinking about it, but yet it's creeping into all these areas of your life. So
Mm-hmm.
in Revelation Wellness, there's a woman that I love that works there that uses the term gospel goggles. And I just love that. It's thinking about, you're putting on your goggles, your glasses, your gospel goggles, and you're seeing things how God does. And we just don't see that way. Like, I fairly regularly spend time in the morning asking God to help me to see this situation the way you do, or help me to see this person the way that you do, God. Help me to wear my gospel goggles today. And um, I believe that's what we need, because when we really think about that, how Jesus lived, how we read at the beginning in Max Lucado's version of Jesus walking on earth, and then we think about how he loves us and accepts us and has grace and mercy for us. It's not the way that we are treating ourselves and holding the standards that he doesn't hold those standards. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, but when God is the one that we look to, and we look to his standard, we're just going to have a lot more grace for ourselves. And Michelle and I even like pondered this question the other day of, like, who's to say what perfect is anyway? Like, is there going to be a rubric that,
Yeah.
here's perfect, here's a little bit less than perfect here, and it's going to look different for each of us.
Yeah.
And when I was thinking about that today, I thought about my classes at the gym. So
Mm.
I'm constantly saying at the gym that you don't need to look like anyone else. If you're doing something different than what I'm doing, that's okay. I kind of say the disclaimer of, unless it looks like something that's going to hurt you, I'm not
Yeah.
going to worry about it. And sometimes there are people that kind of explain to me why, and like, it's all good. It's all good. Thank you for telling me. But at the same time,
Yeah.
it's okay that you look different than I do when we're doing this
Mm-hmm.
workout.
Yeah. So another example just of that idea of perfect that is so nebulous and out there, like, to be defined different by everyone. When
Yeah.
I take a few watercolor courses online, and I prefer really loose watercolors, so that you don't have to be perfect. So you can just, like, let the water flow, and it's supposed to
Mm.
be that kind of a look, right?
Yeah.
But one of the teachers said, don't try to make it perfect, because if you look at nature, it's not perfect.
Yeah.
Every tree is not completely symmetrical, and all the leaves do not have equal points on them. And, some flower petals are wilted, brown, different, colors than the other. Nothing is perfect. And
Yeah.
that's the way God created it. That's the way creation is. It's not perfect.
Yeah. Yet it's beautiful. I think about
Yeah.
that. Like, it doesn't have to be whatever perfect even means, but it's beautiful.
Beautiful in its imperfection.
Yes.
Yeah. So the problem also that we have when we set this impossible perfectionistic standard is as soon as you set that standard, you're already lost because the standard is a moving target. It's just always moving, this idea of perfect. So that target cannot be
Yeah.
hit.
Yeah.
So there's a problem right there. And perfectionism, here's a big downfall of it, is it moves us out of the present. So if you've ever been in that struggle, you can imagine yourself where you're thinking about your performance and how you look. You're not right there in the present, enjoying those that you're with or the activity you're doing. It just takes you to a different place. And I think one of the huge pitfalls of perfectionism that probably feeds it hugely in our time is social media. So it will play into wanting to compare, or people are just putting their best sides on social media. So we think, oh, we're not doing all they're doing. We don't look the way they do. How are they doing that? We need to strive for that. And it just feeds this idea of perfectionism, which again is an imaginary. Like what you see on social media is not that real. It's not
Right.
their every moment, day to day real.
Yeah.
And so, although there's a movement right now, it seems, on social media for everybody to show their real down and dirty, but overall, it's their good stuff. And we can't attain that. We can't be all things that everybody else is. God's gifted us a certain way and made us
Yeah.
a certain way. And to appreciate that is to be fully present and compassionate to ourselves the way God made us. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I was
and then,
thinking about social media in our decluttering episode that was out recently. And when I worked on decluttering during the summer,
Mhm.
that was the most feedback I got online when I would post a picture of this closet back here on the inside and show like, oh my gosh, look at this. This is my life. This is real. And if I could turn this camera around, I would show you guys right now my desk, and that's real. It's just that's not typically what you put on social media. But when I did, I think people were like, oh, okay, she's real. She's not always just health coaching. She's she's cleaning out a messy closet
Yeah,
or
well,
living with a messy closet for years. Yeah.
makes you very real and approachable. Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So I think another one of the huge pitfalls to perfectionism is how that translates to our need to be perfect for God. And so if we have this idea that God has this like really strict, you know, standard that we need to adhere
Yeah.
to, like we've already failed and we just give up. I know a lot of people say, well, I can't read the Bible as long as you, or I can't do that. So I just
Mhm.
not even going to try. And that
Yeah.
goes back to that idea of shame. And they
Mhm.
say, I am bad. I feel poorly about myself. So therefore I feel poorly about my relationship with God, because I'm sure he feels poorly about me.
Yeah.
And this is a revolving cycle, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so I don't think we need to prove that we're lovable for God.
Yeah.
I know we don't. I know we don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So true. And that just comes back to, I wrote about this in my book, Michelle, when you impacted me so much with your words on your last podcast of like, well, I was walking down the street listening to Michelle's podcast, Michelle and Lexi's podcast, and heard Michelle just say from Zephaniah 3:17, right? 17,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
about God rejoicing over me with singing. And I don't know if I don't even know if you said this. So I don't even think we've been able to find the episode again, but I don't know
Yeah.
if you said, even right now, listener or something, but that's what I heard. Like right now, Lisa, God is rejoicing over you with
Mm-hmm.
singing right now. And I was like, and I just stopped on the road. My dog was on her leash and she's like looking at me, why? And I just like received that right then. Like, I'm not doing anything. I'm not doing
Mm-hmm.
anything. I'm just walking in my neighborhood. I wasn't running, wasn't trying to go fast. I wasn't at my step goal. It wasn't,
Yeah.
and it's just like, God loved me right there. And I was
No
like, that was
performance, no performance standards were being met in that moment.
yeah.
And it
Isn't it
doesn't
just so
matter.
cool?
Yeah.
Yeah, like I'd heard that before, that God loved me. I'd read that. Someone just talked to me about that today. That's funny.
Mhm.
That when you can know something and then you experience it. And that's what
Yeah.
I was like, I experienced it right then. I was like,
Yeah.
okay,
So
this
cool.
is what she's talking about. Oh, so I think that's a huge part of the solution, which we're moving toward the solution here.
Yeah.
And I think what you just mentioned is just the hugest part of the solution is
Mhm.
accepting God's love. And a beautiful picture of that is the prodigal son in the Gospels. So if you're not familiar, readers or listeners, I suggest you read about the prodigal son in the Bible. I think you might resonate. I know I do. So the prodigal son is a character in the Bible who left his father and lived a life just of shame. He had this inheritance, he had a wonderful life going for him, but he wasn't satisfied with it. He wanted more. Maybe he wanted perfect. Maybe he was searching for perfect. And he left and with his father's and with his inheritance and um, ended up like losing the money and working like taking living with pigs and just a shameful lowly life, lowly job, and holding himself with really low value. And all the while, the father just longed to have him back. He didn't care. He cared, I'm sure, about what the son was doing, but he wasn't going to keep his distance from him because of what the son was doing. His son wasn't living a virtuous, perfect life, so he couldn't come back. No, the father longed to have him back. He wasn't looking for the cleaned up version of himself. He just wanted to be back with him. And if you read that story, you'll see beautiful it turns out. And it's exactly in line with me standing in the street and receiving that God loves me right here, right where I'm at, not doing anything amazing. So that's kind of our biblical example of the solution. And then Michelle read some definitions of perfectionism by Brene Brown. And we did a lot of digging into the book, The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown. And in that book, she has 10 guideposts for wholehearted living. They're all about like developing something and letting go of something. So I'm going to read some to you and we might talk about them a little bit, and then Michelle will read some to you. So the first guidepost for wholehearted living is cultivating authenticity and letting go of what other people think. I think that's a big thing at the gym. I
Yeah.
just keep thinking about the gym, like,
Yes.
just being yourself and not worrying about what the person next to you is doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's in all of life, you know. I'm
Yeah.
sure students suffer with it when you're at work. You have to deal with that. Thinking about, oh, are people going to like my outfit today? Or just small things, big
Yes,
things, everything. Yeah.
for sure. I have a daughter in high school, so it's like that she's in that phase of like determining where she can really be herself and be accepted, and then
Mhm.
just letting go of what people think. The second one is cultivating self compassion and letting go of perfectionism. That's
Mhm.
really the the gist of this whole episode, is that just having self compassion for yourself and letting go of that impossible standard. Number three is cultivating your resilient spirit, letting go of numbing and powerlessness. So, really building up your resilience. There's lots of ways to do that, mindfulness and slowing down and all of that kind of thing, and letting go of the distraction of numbing and powerlessness. Cultivating gratitude and joy, and letting go of scarcity and fear of the dark. We had to dig into that one a little bit and kind
Yeah.
of figure out, what did she mean. We forgot, we both read the book, but forgot what that meant, the fear of the dark. And it's kind of that. I think, Michelle, you have some things to say, and I want to hear that. So, like that foreboding, like all, if you're a parent, or
Mhm.
even I did this when I was a cat parent, worrying about my cats. Like, you love the cat so much, or you love the kids so much,
Yeah.
and like, what's going to happen?
Yes, she does talk a lot about it in many of her books. She
Hmm.
calls it foreboding joy. And I remember the
Hmm.
first time I heard that and she described it, I was like, oh, there's a term for this thing that I have. It's when, if you've ever had friends where everything is going along really well and there's no reason for it, but you start to have this like fear that something is going to go wrong or that something's
Yeah.
going to change. And when she says fear of the dark, I think she's just thinking of dark things, bad things happening. And
Yeah.
she says that I've heard that phrase described where it originated, but where the other shoe drops. So you're just
Mm,
waiting for the shoe to drop.
yeah.
And someone told me this week, they said that God doesn't have another shoe. I
Yeah.
was like, oh, good.
Right.
Because if you're living in this idea of scarcity, like I don't have enough, or there's, there's joy, but something's hanging like dark cloud over here, then again,
Yeah.
you can't be present. You can't be who you are
Yes.
and enjoy God and enjoy the people around you.
So true. So true.
Yep.
And then the fifth one is cultivating intuition and trusting faith, letting go of the need for certainty. And that one hit me when I read it again today. Um, just that faith coming back to, I mean, we get to, as believers, um, get to think about where our faith really lies, where it comes from, where we direct it to and everything, and letting go of that need to know exactly how things are going to go.
Yeah,
Tricky one.
because the two are opposite, as
Hmm.
these are all two sides of a coin. But if you can't have faith if you always need to have everything certain,
Yeah.
like you just can't. The two can't go
Yeah.
together.
Hebrews, right? Faith
Yeah.
is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see.
Yes.
Yeah. Hmm.
So that brings us to number 6,
Yep.
cultivating creativity and letting go of comparison.
Yeah.
So in some of our research for this episode, we did find that comparison, as we've kind of talked about already with social media, is a huge part of perfectionism. It's one of the driving factors. And I think it's interesting that she notes creativity as the
Mm.
flip side for it. I'm curious about that. I don't know why she does, but I'm a big fan of creativity and how therapeutic it is. I think if you're going to be worried about comparing to somebody, you're not going to practice some forms of creativity.
Yeah,
'Cause
I think about your watercolor example, and when I was a teacher,
Mhm.
thinking about kids like trying to make theirs look just like mine or
Yeah,
just like the kid next to them or whatever, and then they weren't tapping into that creative,
yeah.
their own ideas, their own creative ideas.
Yeah, it's one of the things I actually just worked on this last weekend when I was painting. I was like, I am going to branch out and try not to just look at someone's painting, but do something from my head. And so I did. It was a big step for me.
That's
And
awesome.
another example of this idea of comparison is, we have talked about it in another episode, but if you're teaching or instructing, particularly like I teach yoga and some other fitness classes, if I am going to be worried about how another teacher does it or compare myself to them, and it happens, like all teachers suffer with this, but um, this idea of comparison is, especially if you go to someone else's class and you're like, oh boy. I remember the very first class I taught. I don't know if it was the very first, but it was kind of one where I was finishing up my training. I think that's what it was. And I had this small little class, and my leader was coming, which is very intimidating. My sister came, who's also been an instructor for a number of years, but like 4 other instructors came. And I was like, oh no, one's bad enough. This is it's like,
Yeah.
but in the end, I just had to tell myself, I'm a beginner. And I've heard somebody
Mm,
say, we're all beginners.
yeah.
We really are. We're all beginners. We're always learning.
Hmm.
So if we get stuck in comparing, um, we're going to get stuck.
Yeah, right. It's true.
Number 7, she says, cultivate play and rest and let go of exhaustion as a status symbol and
Mhm.
productivity as self-worth. This one always gets me.
I know. Don't you kind of want to go, ouch, ouch?
That's when like someone asks you, how have you been? You're like, oh, I've been so busy. Da, da, da. And you say it like with such pride, like it's a great
Yes.
thing. I've been so busy. I'm only sleeping 3 hours at night, something like that. And you're like,
Right.
I'm so awesome. And like, wait,
Yes.
that's not something to be proud of, I don't think.
Right. Right.
But that's what
Yeah.
we do.
So,
And then, oh, I got
hmm
this much done today. Sometimes I have a friend and we compare our massive lists of things we get done. And it's just like, we feel great about ourselves when we're done. As like, it improves our self-worth. Yeah, that's not the way to go. Number 8, cultivate calm and stillness and let go of anxiety as a lifestyle. Calm and stillness
Yeah.
are practices that are very hard to implement, but the more you practice them, the more they
Yes.
do counter anxiety.
Yes.
Number 9, cultivate meaningful work and let go of self-doubt and supposed tos. Supposed
Mm-hmm.
dash to. I'm supposed to do this, right? I don't know if I can do this. And this just leads to self paralysis. Is that what we were calling it?
Analysis paralysis, I think.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
Life paralysis, I think, is what
Mm.
somebody termed it. But anyway,
Okay.
it's we wouldn't be doing this podcast if that was in play because yeah, we have self-doubts. And when I first decided to podcast with Lexi in my first podcast, we're like, oh, let's do a podcast. And we're like, we don't know how to do it. Oh, there's YouTube. Let's go learn on YouTube and let's figure out a microphone, all of the things. I don't know what platforms. Well, YouTube will tell you that too. And it was a figure it out as you go. If I would have
Yeah.
just said, I don't think, like, I'm not a podcaster, we're not going to do this, I would have missed out on a lot of fun. And then
Yeah.
Lisa and I would have
Yeah.
never
Yeah.
got
I
to
would have
do
missed it
this.
too. Yeah.
Yeah. Because when first time I asked you to be on that podcast, you're like,
hmm
oh, okay, the
Yeah.
microphone and
Right.
recordings
Very
and
scary. Very scary.
so you'll miss out on so much if
Yeah.
you get stuck in the self-doubt
Yeah.
and the
You'll miss out on meaningful work.
totally. Yep.
Yeah.
So we cultivate our meaningful work and we let go of the self-doubt. And then the final one is cultivating laughter, song, and dance. I love this one. And let go of cool and always in control.
hmm
Oh,
Yes.
that's
You
good. 'Cause
see that we do, that's what we let go of on here. We let go of looking cool,
yeah,
always in
totally.
control.
I'm
Just
so
go with
glad
it.
we don't have to live up to that one.
Right?
Because
Cool
I
is
am,
a hard standard. I don't know.
yeah, it's a standard that I don't try to meet.
Right?
It's going to be a nerd. So you'll see each guidepost that we've just listed. It's like a coin with two sides. One side, it shares what we cultivate. As Lisa said, the other, it instructs us what to let go of. And
We
I
should
know,
put them in the show notes. We should put
yeah,
these. It's a little long list.
but
Yeah.
also you could, I know that a long time ago when I read this, I just clicked on a link and there was an image where I could print these and I had them in my office for a while. So we could also
Yes.
give a link and they could print a pretty copy of
I
it.
saw a lot of those. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So these two things work hand in hand. I think it's great. I love how she calls them guideposts to wholehearted living. Because for me,
Yes.
like Caleb was described in the Bible as living wholeheartedly, and that's how I
Yeah.
want to live, wholeheartedly.
Yes.
So the cultivating part is just about creating something positive. It's moving you forward by putting your oars in the water to row your boat on the sea of life. And then that letting go, what we're going to let go of in these guideposts, is about removing resistance. It's detaching the anchors from your boat so you can make effective progress when you row. Yeah, that's a
Okay.
long list. But
Yeah.
here we go.
That was a long list. So all of that, I'm going to go back a little bit to just say again that that is one way to look at and heal perfectionism. And I'm going to share another way that I've had my own personal experience with. It is through a type of therapy called IFS, Internal Family Systems. Another way to look at perfectionism. So Internal Family Systems, or IFS, was developed by a man named Dr. Richard Schwartz. So if you've seen the Inside Out movies, you have a great understanding of IFS. So you might be going, IFS, that's a weird term. Internal family systems, is this about all your family? No, it's not. But if you've seen Inside Out, you'll have a good picture of what it is. So, in Inside Out, there's the characters within Riley that are like anger, sadness, joy, fear, and disgust. They were all parts of her. And we all have parts of us. IFS sees the mind as made up of different parts or sub-personalities, each with its own perspectives, emotions, and roles. So in IFS, these parts are thought of as sort of an internal family. Like when you imagine that movie, those characters almost seem like a little family within Riley. They each play a different role. And the goal of IFS therapy is to help people understand and heal those parts so they can work together harmoniously. If you saw Inside Out 2, I think it really shows that process of them working together, the parts working together, especially anxiety gets really loved on and accepted, and it's really beautiful to see. And so if you think about it that way, if you think about perfectionism being just a part of you. Like, I really try to stay away from thinking about myself as a label, like I'm a perfectionist or
Yeah,
I'm anxious. I'm an anxious person. Like, it's a part of me.
that's good.
Um, and it may be a part of your personality. Perfectionism may be a part of your personality, and it can be very helpful and empowering to look at it that way. So what this process has done for me is to help me embrace those different parts of me. So when we look at perfectionism as a part of us that is trying to help or protect us, it's trying to do something to serve us, then we're free to explore what it's trying to protect. Is it protecting the fear of failure, and release the pressure to be flawless and perfect? By acknowledging and understanding the underlying needs of that part, what that part is doing, what it really needs, um, then we can learn to embrace all of it, all parts
Mm-hmm.
of it. So, what that looks like for me, practically speaking, embracing imperfection is like sitting with a journal and God and open hands, try to have open heart and just let that part come forward, that part of me, that part that is trying to control everything by being perfect, by trying to quiet that inner critic and listen to what it has to say, listen to how hard it's working to protect me, um, listen to where it started. When did that part began, come into existence in me, and what does it need? That's really a key thing. What does it need? It often just needs me to listen to it and see what is going on in me, what's triggering that part, that inner critic, or that part that's trying to control. And that allows me to have the next thing, which is self-compassion. Perfectionism and the inner critic part is often driven by a desire to protect rather than harm. It feels like harm. It feels like it's harming, but its goal really is to try to protect. And so by looking at it that way, I can be more curious and compassionate toward it. I can develop a more nurturing internal dialogue, like, oh, notice that coming up again. I'm comparing myself to Sally over here, and I'm criticizing myself. What's going on? What do I need? Um, and allowing that self-acceptance and just an increased sense of self-worth. And as a Christian, remembering God's constant, never failing, always present love for me when I'm just walking down the road, not
Yeah.
doing anything. Yeah.
It sounds like a beautiful way to practice awareness and self acceptance and receiving God's love for all parts of
Mm-hmm.
us, right?
Mm-hmm. It's like
Yeah.
putting those goggles on, looking inward and going, "Oh, there's that part of me that's,
Yeah.
it's hurting. It's trying to be protected. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's
Mm-hmm.
reasons that we act this way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've given you a lot to think about today, haven't we? And as always, we like to try to bring it down to two simple things. And you might want to take these questions and maybe sit with your journal and ponder them, and see which parts of this resonate with you. You don't have to take it all. But number one, The first step might be to acknowledge and embrace the inner critic or perfectionist part of yourself. And then what does that feel like? What does it feel like to embrace that part of you? What does it look like? How does that show up in your life? And the second thing is next time you notice that part, because once you start practicing this, you'll be aware when you notice that part showing up again, try noticing it with kindness and get curious about why it is showing up. How is it trying to help you? Yeah, so there's your 2 simple steps. And thank you listening to us and our ideas on perfectionism. And I bet that you know somebody that you want to pass this episode on to. You might have someone in mind. Please share and pass it on. And then also find us on YouTube under Simple Steps for the Whole You if you want to see our faces and not just listen. And then our Facebook group is a great place to have community. We've been sharing pictures of decluttering, and other things that we share on the podcast get to actually be pictured and commented on in our Facebook group. So thanks, friends. Thanks for listening. And stay tuned next week where we'll talk more about this and the word failure.
Thank you.
Bye, friends.